Hello, everyone, and welcome to the sofa, where we sit down with some of the most interesting participants of the World Water Week in Stockholm to learn more about what's being discussed here. My name is Penny Magunakis, host of the sofa, and this session is called Strong Wash Systems, the Essential Element for SDG 6. And with me here to discuss this further is Dr. Kalis Tindimugaya, Commissioner, Water Resources Planning and Regulation, Ministry of Water and Environment in Uganda. And Ella Lazarte, Senior Water and Sanitation Advisor at the U.S. Agency for International Development. Patrick Moriarty, CEO of IRC. Welcome all.
Thanks
for having us.
Thank you.
Let's jump right in. Patrick, traditionally we hear about wash services. But what do you mean when you say wash systems?
Oh, great, nice question. So, wash. What? Wash, water, sanitation, hygiene. All right. So, fundamental necessities for for life, basic human right. So, when we talk about a wash service, what are we talking about? We're talking about the fact that you turn on your tap, and some water comes out. And that you know if you turn your tap on tomorrow, it's still going to come out. And if you know you turn it on at the end of the year, it's still going to come out. Similarly, the sanitation service. You have a latrine, you have a toilet, you flush the toilet, it works. And something happens to what you've just flushed away, it gets treated. That's a wash service. All the stuff around that makes that work, that makes that happen, that's the wash system. So the tap is the part of the wash system. The pipes that lead into the tap are part of the wash system. The people who manage and look after and build those pipes, that's part of the wash system. So the wash system is everything that surrounds that tap, that latrine, and that provides that service.
I mean, do you have anything, can you tell us more about the different components of a wash system? Ella, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'll jump right in. So in terms of the different components, thanks Patrick for explaining what a wash system is. I think different people have different characterizations of what are the different components. Some people call them building blocks, some people call them subsystems. So we could start with, I won't go through the litany of it, but let's say I'll focus on 5 quickly. So one is policies and legislation. Make sure that there are policies in place. Is there legislation to make sure that we can actually achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and have safe water and sanitation access for all? Another one is institutions and institutional capacity and arrangements. Many countries have the policies already, but may not necessarily have all the institutional arrangements in place, clear roles and responsibilities. And the third one, which is really important, as a lot of the discussions here this week has been on financing. So what about financing? And we could be talking about the different actors. So Patrick mentioned the people, the actors in a system. So we could be talking about global investors, donors. So financing could mean that who's funding the infrastructure, and also financing in terms of private capital. And tariffs at the community level. So all of that as a subsystem. And then the fourth one that I want to mention, which is really important, is operations and maintenance. It may sound like a boring topic, not very exciting to not create new infrastructure, but it's really important once the system, the service is there, how do we make sure it continues over time? So it's important to look at that. And if you look at the last GLASS report, O&M is really not as much of a focus from 2017. A lot of countries haven't really focused that much on operations and maintenance. So that's an important part of the system. And lastly, I think, which is not as emphasized, is social and cultural factors. How do you make sure that people are actually paying for water? What are those ingrained social and cultural factors that we need to think about? And that's also a subsystem in itself, or a component. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Patrick, do you have anything to add about the components here?
Well, I think perhaps almost to go a step back and say, so why even make the point, right? This seems completely obvious. But if you look at where we're spending our money at the moment in WASH, okay, we've got these huge challenge facing us, which is to get safely managed water, safely managed sanitation to everyone in the world by 2030. All right, we've got a huge gap. So there's been a tendency in the past to invest a lot of money in the hardware part of the system. All right, so hey, let's build pumps, let's provide latrines. But what we find is by focusing only on that part of the service, that you build a pump, 2 years later you come back, it's not working anymore. So that's why we say let's put the focus on not just on the hardware, but on the whole system that's necessary to be in place to make that hardware work. All right? That's how we talk about systems. We talk about health systems. We talk about education systems. Nobody thinks that if you build a school and do nothing else, you're going to get educated kids out of it. Nobody thinks that if you build a hospital and you don't put any doctors in it, you don't think about how you're going to source medicines, that magically people are going to get better. And yet in WASH, for a long time, we focused on building hardware. So that's why it's so essential to talk about the system. A key part of the system is the infrastructure. You know, that's another of the building blocks. We got to do it right. We got to invest in infrastructure. We got to find money to pay for new infrastructure. $114 billion a year is the rough gap that we think we face to achieve the SDGs. But if we don't spend as much time and effort looking at all the other building blocks, these other aspects that Ella's been talking about, we can invest all the money we want in new infrastructure, and we're still not going to achieve the goal because stuff's going to break down faster than we can build new stuff.
And Calist, if we take the Ugandan example, what challenges do you face in the WASH sector in Uganda?
Thank you very much. And first of all, we have invested a lot in WASH, provision of WASH services, but we haven't made as much progress as we would have loved to make for a number of reasons. Number one is the silo approach. We tend to provide WASH services as individual organizations and as individual departments. You'll find the government department is going in to provide a service, an NGO is going there, private organization is going there, a religious institution is going there. So all of us go there, but we don't harmonize approaches. We don't actually leverage resources in terms of capacity and financial resources. And also sometimes the approaches we employ, in some cases they are contradictory. So that's the number one. The silo approach, in my view, is one of the biggest challenges. The other one also, I think my colleagues have already mentioned, we tend to focus more on the infrastructure. And very little money is put into operation and maintenance. So infrastructure is put in place. After a few years, it is all down. But also focusing on the resource. We don't give attention to managing the resource. Many situations we assume the water is available, and then when the catchments around the water sources are degraded, then the water is not available. And the other issue, of course, is capacities. Sometimes capacities are limited. Human resources are limited, and also the funds are limited, especially at the local level. So we find that we are not making much progress moving forward. And of course, the other thing also is oftentimes governments are not taking a lead. And when governments are not taking a lead, then you have a problem. So we need to make sure that at least we have service provision that involves all the different players so that we can create synergy, leverage resources, and ensure that we are all moving in the right direction.
Yeah. And how are you addressing this? Do you have any promising strategies to share?
Yes, right now, when it comes to looking at the system, we are also trying now to make sure that, as my colleagues have mentioned, we don't just look at the infrastructure, we look at the system. So we're employing a systems approach, and in my country now we are providing these services through a watershed, a catchment approach. We want to see where is this water coming from? How can we ensure that this water is protected? And we have also put in place some policy. We have developed as a country what we call water source protection guidelines. And we have issued a policy that every water infrastructure project has to have a component on protecting the catchment around the source. And we are putting up to 3% of the investment to going into protecting the catchment. The idea then is to make sure that you look at what is happening around the infrastructure, ensure that the quality of the water is maintained, ensure that the content of the water is maintained, and whatever is done is environmentally friendly. We are also trying to promote coordination. We are putting in place coordination structures where we bring all the players together to try and dialogue, plan together, and implement together so that we can learn from each other. So we are trying to remove the silo approach by getting all these together. And we're also giving attention to capacity building at various levels so that the local level are able to take responsibility. We're also trying to identify innovative financing sources. For the first time, we are bringing the private sector together to come in and also provide a service, either through self-supply or providing the resources for doing this. So we have recognized the challenges, and we are gradually moving forward in a more coordinated manner.
And Patrick, how do you, as an external actor or international NGO, support this sector process?
So I think Dr. Callis has set out a lot of what government does at its level, all right? And I think that we, my organization, IRC, we seek to play a supporting role to that, both at the national level in the countries we work, but also at the district level. So we've identified districts or municipalities, or whatever it is, they go by different names, but basically the level at which you find the lowest level of local government, where you find mayors, where you find district chief executives, people who have a responsibility and accountability to deliver services to people and to engage with the sort of the broad networks of partners that Dr. Callis was listing at that level, to engage them around some form of shared vision, where we say, hey, we as a district, we as the private sector in the district, we as local government in the district, we acknowledge this shared vision to get everybody in our district access to safe water, access to sanitation, and we're going to try and work out how to do it. Because part of the point about addressing WASH as a systems challenge is acknowledging that there's multiple different actors involved: private sector, government, regulators, users, financiers, and that unless everybody's to some extent engaged around a common vision and working within some sort of shared framework, and where it's reasonably clear, what I expect of you, what you expect of me, it's very difficult to do. So a lot of our work is actually in acting as we'd call it a hub to collective action, to engaging and supporting local actors, particularly local government, to drive towards that shared vision and to solve the problems. Inevitably, as we drive towards universal access, we find that that what we call the last mile, the people who live most distant from small towns or at the top of the hill or in the poorest areas, have very specific problems, and we need to begin to address those problems as we drive towards universal access.
And I mean, what have you picked up from other sectors or the global dialogue that have been applied in Uganda? What have you adapted or adopted? Is there...
Repeat?
What have you picked up to apply to Uganda that you've picked up from global dialogue?
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, we do recognize that globally, the issue of partnership is being promoted more, that it's no longer just the business of government alone to do it. Provision of WASH services actually requires many, many players. I think one thing we are running is we need to open up space so that we get to collaborate with the different players at different levels. They could be international organization, could be local organization, could be development partners, so that we can deliver together. But at the heart of that, government is key in showing the way. Government has to take leadership and also has to create the enabling environment. At the end of the day, if the enabling environment is not good, then all of that cannot happen. And I think that's what we are picking up. But also what we are picking up is that we oftentimes think we don't have enough money, but we can really utilize available resources a bit more efficiently by creating collaborative mechanisms. I think a lot can be done with the money we have. So we also feel that it's not a question of looking for new money. It's a question of how do you leverage available resources so that you can move forward. And of course, ownership is going to be very important, because at the end of the day, It's the people are living there that know the challenges, that they know what could be done, and they should be at the heart of that. So involvement of the stakeholders at the lowest level is something I think we have learned and which we are giving a lot more attention to. Yeah.
And Ella, from your perspective, how can donors engage and support government-led initiatives?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think, first of all, we have to be humble as donors. It's important for us to listen. It sounds very basic, but I would say I would want to overemphasize it, really, because if we're not engaging with a stakeholder, so just from a more specific example, usually donors would engage and say, what are the needs and preferences? We design a program. And then sometimes you don't necessarily engage throughout. Basically, after design, when you implement a program and monitor, we don't engage as much. And so I think listening the whole time and actively listening to the different actors in the system and working with government hand in hand is really important. And that comes at a cost. And so I say that's basic, but it has cost because that means you have to have the staffing so that you can actively partner with a government. And it's not just, oh, we partnered with the government of Uganda when we launched this initiative and that's it. So I think it involves that. And aside from listening, which is, kind of, it should be obvious, I want to emphasize that it's really just being able to, USAID looks at it in terms of our local systems framework. And it's really just helping and strengthening local systems. It's working with host country governments to make sure that they have the capacity and the resources in place to deliver the results they need to deliver. And it's really having the governments in the lead. And it's one thing to say that, but how do we do that as donors? So it's back to the listening and supporting what they have. And so I just wanted to give a quick example from India, for example. We've been supporting the Ministry of Urban Development when they launched the Swachh Bharat mission to end open defecation in the country. The government requested that we support them. And one way to do that was to actually support the ministry, the project implementation unit, program management unit, to implement their own program instead of USAID and also the Gates Foundation implementing a standalone or parallel program. So it's making sure that we don't create parallel structures, that Dr. Callis talked about different approaches, sometimes they're in contrast to each other. So making sure that we're supporting, they're in the lead, the government's in the lead, and we help them in whatever way they need so that they can do that better and more effectively.
You all have your roles to play, it seems. And while system strengthening is important, how do you bring people on board and engage for this way of thinking? Patrick.
I think a lot of our, so we're an NGO. We spend a lot of time just championing this way of thinking, okay? So, and if I look over the last 10 years, a lot of where we started on this journey was actually collecting a lot of information and data about failure. Failure of not adopting a systems approach. Failure of, as Dr. Callis was saying at the start, different actors almost randomly coming and doing their thing. An NGO comes and develops a well here, a project goes and develops a small town pipe network there. And, looking at decades of relative failure there, so not complete failure. We achieved the MDG for water. We didn't achieve it for sanitation, right? But I think saying how we're working at the moment isn't good enough. So collecting that evidence, bringing that evidence to the table, bringing it into places like World Water Week, discussing with donors, sometimes giving the donors a hard time, saying, come on, why are you guys so focused on these little bitty projects? Why can't you engage with government? Why aren't you engaging in national systems, joint sector reviews in country? Okay, so creating a bit of push, but at the same time trying to be supportive and I guess create pull by creating tools for engaging with the system, from very detailed tools about how do you do life cycle costing, how do you do asset inventories in rural settings, so appropriate specific tools for local system strengthening that can be of help to people. And then also, as I said earlier, a specific role that IRC tries to play is by playing this hub role, by being a convener, helping to bring people together to discuss with each other, to share these problems. Because we can all sit here and talk on the sofa in Stockholm, and that's nice and it's fun, but actually the real discussions are happening in Kampala, they're happening in Accra, they're happening down at the district level. So bringing people together, helping to expose them to what's possible for their situation. And I have my kind of pet phrase is removing systems blindness. So first of all, getting people to understand that the solution to sustainability and to service delivery is to make the whole system work. So first of all, don't be blind, see the whole system. And then be clear about what your place is in the system. And once you understand what your place is in the system, do the best you can to fulfill your role, but be aware that other people are relying on you and you need to interact with and talk to them.
Ella, do you have anything to add?
I think it's important for us to really think as donors beyond 5 years. 5 seems to be the magic number of projects. You prepare a project for 5 years. And it's very hard to change that. But it doesn't mean that you can't improve on it. So how do you think long term, even given that constraint of preparing something for 5 years, and think about it, taking a systems approach is really taking a longer term 10 to 20 year approach.
Exactly.
So how do you sequence? So first you have to sequence your interventions. How do you set it up so that you work more on policies if you need to, institutional arrangements, and then later on, beyond the 5 years, you work on actual service delivery in a program in a certain country. But that has implications for us donors, because that means we can't say that we serve millions of people. So really, how do you balance those tensions is something that I think at USAID we've been really thinking through how to do that. And in our new strategy and plan for USAID, we're emphasizing governance as a big piece and institutions. And that means we're not just perhaps providing direct access, safe access to water to millions of people. We have to look at the institutional capacity. So being able to say that and think about the interventions, because I wanted to give an example of this. If you look on our website, globalwaters.org, we have a recent study on market-based sanitation, and it shows that the uptake, so if you want to involve the private sector in sanitation, the best outcomes actually in terms of sales, for example, selling more latrines, happened between years 4 and 6. Our normal project ends at year 5. And so it was really eye-opening, and this was a review that was just done and published about a month ago. And so if sales happen and start going up at year 4, that means by year 5, our results are still not there. And as donors, we have to be more patient and factor that in when we design our programs. And so back to what Patrick was saying about learning, we're also learning. So emphasizing learning within USAID and making sure that learning is then embedded and it's factoring into design of new projects that we have is really key.
Yeah. Dr. Callis, do you have anything to add from your perspective on, engaging people in strengthening WASH systems?
Yes, I think personally I'm happy that space is being opened up. Again, the system thinking approach, I know of course is not easy. Many people want to see the results on the ground, and I think as she has mentioned, everybody would want to fund an infrastructure project so that you can come and say, I have served 100,000 people, I have served 1 million people. But the system thinking requires all of these different pieces to be funded. And I think the issue is, who will put the money on the table to meet all of those? If you have to have sustainable waste services, we have to look at the big picture and maybe be able to share the costs of those different pieces. Otherwise, if you come and say, I only have money for infrastructure, how will you sustain the infrastructure? Okay. Who will pay for O&M? Who will pay for ensuring that the quality of the water is maintained? Who will pay for the capacity building? Who will pay for institutional collaboration and coordination? So I'm happy this discussion is on the table. And I really would want maybe IRC and other partners to move it forward so that we can have that general understanding and appreciation that you are not going to deliver these services in a sustainable manner without looking at the whole system. And maybe it is time to plan together and share responsibilities, and all of us are counted as having delivered the final service. But of course, at the heart of that, also governments have put in more money to ensure that some of these aspects are funded, but it requires all of us. And I think as government, we are recognizing that we cannot go far if we don't open up space. And we are also, I think, recognizing that as government, we have to lead by example, put in money, but also show direction, so that whoever is coming to work in the country can know the rules of the game and support that initiative moving forward. But the heart of that is the people. I think engaging the people at the lowest level is going to be very important, because they are the ones who are going to sustain these services, but they are the ones who are benefiting from these services. So I'm happy that the discussion is happening, but you still have a bit of work to do to get everybody on the table.
Yeah. Thank you all very much for sharing your perspectives and experiences. And thank you for watching this SOFA session. Please stay tuned for more episodes throughout the World Water Week.